Welcome back to my Dioramas for Displaying Fishing Lures Part 2. Now we left off at the construction of the backboards mated to the base, and so the next step is to apply some kills to the back. You still got to go from here to the finished product, which is here, the Angry Bird display, and of course here the display of my advertisement lures, and then lastly the display of my old vintage antique lures. So let's continue. Well, let's get back to the kills, or the primer that I'm going to use. That's where we kind of left off in the last episode. So it's no big deal. This is pretty common primer. You can find it at any hardware store. So while the primer dries, let's go shopping again. But this time, let's go to a pawn shop. What I need is some old fishing rods. And I'm going to use these fishing rods as rafters or beams to help support the backboard and to hang some lures or some artificial fish from. So now that the primer is dry, it's time to spray on this Flexstone paint. See, the effect I'm trying to get is to have the back look like that good old-fashioned Texas Hill Country limestone. That's the kind of look I want for it. So while that's drying, I might as well work on those bumpers so it won't scratch the surface of whatever I'm going to place these dioramas on. All I did was cut out some circles on some excess or old corkboard that I had on a previous project and glued it on some old felt from another old project. And when it all dried, I just cut the excess felt off, and well, you'll see later on when I go ahead and glue the bumpers on. So remember those aquarium backgrounds I got, I think either at PetSmart or Petco, I can't remember, but it's time to start working on those. So the first thing to do is just cut them to size, obviously. And I also had these artificial lily pads. They were kind of flimsy and I wanted to use them somehow, but I had to use that silicone glue to glue two of them together so they had enough strength so that if I attached them to the wall of the backdrop, I could, like, I don't know, put a lure on top of it or something. Hey, it's break time and the mail came, so let's take a break for a mystery tackle box unboxing. So mystery tackle box is a monthly subscription of tackle that comes to you, and what I like about it is it kind of challenges you. So these are the items I got during this time period. Lizards. In fact, I used that particular lizard on my last vacation, and this is a neat looking crawl, and I love it. I used it on another fishing vacation on a jig rig. Alright, okay, let's get back to work here. So it's time to apply those backdrops. So I put on my Jackson Pollock hat and started doing my glue art, and started applying the background. and smooth it down with my hands the best I could, and then clamp it down with all those little clamps. Thank God I had my band clamp, and I'll tell you why. Because the backdrop on the Angry Bird diorama came off of the base, so I had to glue it back in shape. And this backdrop was falling, well, it was all bent out of shape, so I had an idea where I'll just make this form out of a bunch of cardboard and use it to try to mold it back into shape again. So this is the process of me making this form, and it's drying right now, as you can see, but I'll use it later. And let's see, I think this is the big one that had the problem. So the aquarium background fits in just fine. Time to do my Jackson Pollock glue art job here, and then of course place the aquarium background onto it. And then I put the form on there and use that band clamp again to clamp it into shape. So hopefully this will help mold it into a nicer oval. Now I'm at the point where I can just go ahead and glue those little bumpers to the bottom so it won't scratch the surface of whatever I put it on. But I have this nasty seam here, and I need to cover it up. And also I need to make some trim to cover up the top edges of the backdrop. So I had all this birch tree bark, so I'm just cutting strips of it, and once I felt like I had enough strips, I began ungluing. But I think it was time for another coffee break, right? This time I wasn't lazy, I made my own. No, Connie, I did not steal that coffee cup. Of course, that's an inside joke for some of you guys. It's time to go ahead and glue the birch tree bark trim to it. This was kind of a tedious process, very slow, a lot of gluing, waiting and drying, gluing, waiting and drying. I mean, just these slides just seems like it just goes on forever and ever, right? But it has to be done. In fact, I think this was the longest part of this whole process. And that's where I'm covering up one of the seams. So this was another tedious process. I didn't think it was tedious, but it was kind of long. I started gluing down a bunch of the aquarium gravel and realized that I was out, so I had to run back to Petco, right? And finally got the gravel I needed, as you can see here, and so I could continue on putting down the bottom of the, to simulate, the bottom of a lake or something. And here, this is the Angry Birds lure display. I'm using black, and you'll see why much later on. And again, this was a long, tedious process. Again, you just lay down glue, lay down the aquarium gravel, and it's kind of one of the more boring parts of the whole process. This one for my advertisement lures, I was trying to simulate a Texas Hill Country lake. So I kind of got a little gravel that looked like limestone, basically, that would match the background. And here, this diorama is going to be used for the antique vintage lures. I guess I was more trying to imitate like a South Texas or a East Texas lake. or pond or creek or whatever. And I'm doing the finishing touches here, covering up another seam, because remember it was a 2-ply backboard. This one here was a little shaped unevenly. This one came out okay, and this was kind of a little warped, but don't fear, because that's where those old fishing rods came in. So I'm using those old fishing rods as support rafters or beams, and to help push the backboard into a more oval configuration. And I use kind of like glue and brad nails to set the poles in place, and of course I glued the poles together, and then I covered up the joints with cordage. So yeah, it's time for a lure and prop placement. And you might remember this picture. I'm going to be using this as a reference for the Angry Bird lures. But it's time to end, and stay tuned. So please stay tuned for part 3.